Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Megan Grebner. With us, as always, to talk markets is University of Missouri Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
Short holiday week for us. Very quiet market week. That being said, there were a ton of USDA reports that came out this week, and we'll get into those in just a minute. But to kick us off, let's recap what happened this week in the markets.
Yeah, if we start on the cattle side this week, again, pretty light test. Those feeder cattle markets were actually by and large closed, so no information to report this week. On the live cattle side, up about 250 this week on what's some strength here as we got later in the week. On the futures side, the February live cattle futures contract closed up 30 cents, and the January feeder cattle futures contract closed up 60 cents. Keeping track on the feed side here for a minute, March corn futures were up nearly 13 cents this week. On the beef side, the choice box beef price was up nearly $1. Strength across the board with the exception of what happened in ribs. On the hog side, cash barrel and gilt prices were about $1.30 lower this week. The February lean hog futures contract closed up 85 cents. We did lose $4.20 on the pork cutout value this week, driven primarily by lower ham prices.
Scott, as we look at, I just want to talk cash cattle trade real quick. It's been pretty light and scarce the last couple of weeks. Could that make for a very active week next week or a very active start to the new year?
I think once we get into 2021, we'll see that activity pick up. So slaughter plants certainly slowed as workers there are going to get some time off over the holidays. So I think there was generally less interest in a lot of cash cattle trade, but I do think that'll pick up once we get beyond the first of the year here.
We won't talk slaughter this week because really USDA is kind of given everybody a 4-day weekend. So we don't have all of those details. We'll get into more of that next week when we come back. But cold storage came out earlier this week. As we take a look at those, let's talk beef and pork ending stocks.
Yeah, boy, the pork numbers continue to be positive, Megan, when we look at what we got from USDA this week on cold storage. So 414.1 million pounds of ending pork stocks as of November. That's 28% below where we were a year ago at this time. So it continues a streak of well below year ago levels that we started back in May of this year. So despite what's been some pretty good production numbers, ending stocks of pork have stayed very low. On the beef side of the equation, 511.5 million pounds of beef in freezers at the end of November. That's nearly 7% higher than a year ago. So higher, but I sometimes go, I'm not too worried about where we sit in terms of that number as well. So pretty positive out of cold storage, especially on the pork side of the equation.
Livestock slaughter out yesterday along with hogs and pigs, and we'll get to hogs and pigs here in just a couple of minutes. As we take a look at those numbers, I think one of the interesting things is it looks like cattle weights are starting to come back down a little bit more towards their average.
Yeah, you're right. And I think we don't want to lose sight of how helpful that could be to total beef supplies as we go into 2021. We are seeing those narrow relative to year ago levels. And I think, again, we could be in store for less beef supplies in 2021 as those slaughter weights stay down. They are still above year ago levels, about 1.2% above year ago levels. If you look at commercial beef production for November of this year, it was 1.5% below year ago levels. That really was a function of what was less slaughter, more than offsetting what was some higher dressed weights that we saw for November. On the hog side, we saw barrel and gilt slaughter that was actually lower for November of this year relative to a year ago. Yet the higher weights that we see on the hog side, it was about 4 pounds on a dress basis, November to November, ended up with then what was a November pork production number down about 1%. So lower slaughter numbers actually helped offset that higher weight. If we look at year-to-date numbers, commercial beef production through November down 0.3%, while commercial pork production up 2.4%. Again, year-to-date numbers there.
I think it kind of highlights the fact that we're still producing a lot, but we're also still seeing a lot of demand and want for our products.
Yeah, to me, the supply side is we've kind of got ourselves locked into what we're doing on the supply side. I think you correctly identify as we think about 2021, the demand side is going to be important, and we need demand to continue to stick with us. If we replayed, Megan, a lot of our discussion in early 2020, we would have been talking about demand needing to be strong in 2020, and frankly, it has been. Despite we were having this discussion pre-COVID, and despite all the issues with COVID, I think we've just seen demand that's hung with us better than we would have ever thought.
How long? This year has been so long. But I mean, at the beginning of the year, we've talked about this. Things looked really great. We had the Japan trade agreement. We knew USMCA was going into effect. We had the phase one trade deal in the pipeline. And then everything everything else happened. But it's impressive to see that we're still seeing people buying and wanting US beef and pork.
Yeah, so this is to the beef side of the equation here. As I think about 2021, the thing we do know that's going to happen is probably weights that continue to go down, and slaughter numbers that, especially in the second half of the year, start to fade relative to year ago levels. The drought that we're seeing in the West may have some implications as well about lower numbers, and so the supply side of beef is set up for a contraction, especially again in the second half of the year. And if demand stays with us, which let's think about what happens when we come out of COVID. It's not such a great situation as we've seen cases increase. We've seen parts of the country go through lockdowns, but you get beyond that situation and talk about being able to recover as we get more and more folks vaccinated from COVID-19. And all of a sudden, I think we have some pent up demand to go back out and eat at restaurants. And that typically, I think, favors beef. And so one could actually spin a pretty positive story. And oh, by the way, China and Japan both could be more positive for us on the beef side as we get into 2021. Same for pork generally. So maybe less positive about China as they rebuild their herd. And we have more supplies probably coming on the pork side in 2021 relative to 2020. So maybe not quite as good, but we could see ourselves with a much better situation in 2021.
I told my husband the other day that these words would probably never come out of my mouth again, but I look forward to the day where we're like elbow to elbow in a restaurant waiting to be seated, knowing that like our social life is back to normal or as normal as it can be. And I think about it's impressive also to me to think about the fact that China is now becoming a player on the beef side of things. And that's really good news for the US beef industry.
It does not take much trade to China to drive our beef market here in this country much higher. So we should be paying attention. I know it's a small amount of beef that we're trading to China today, but it still represents a fairly strong amount of total exports. So there's some reasons to, again, be optimistic as we look into 2021.
All right, let's finish up with hogs and pigs. And this is like the white elephant gift in the room this year for the holiday season. Let's start with probably the biggest positive that's going to come out of the report from yesterday.
Yeah, I think without a doubt, it's got to be sow inventory. Down 3% is what we got out of the report. That fell outside the low end of the pre-report estimates. Which, by the way, I agree with you about the white elephant gift. I can't decide whether I should put it back under and grab another gift or not, because it's certainly a double-sided good news, bad news, depending on what you look at here out of the report. But let's not forget that 3% cut in sow numbers may be what's the real gift and the real positive as we get into 2021.
As we take a look at those numbers, that's the good side of it. Let's take a look at that flip side as well. And this is the one that you want to, this is the part of that gift that you want to give back and give it to the cousin that you don't like.
Yeah, exactly. So I go, few things stick out to me, Megan, as I look through the numbers. Fairing intentions, D's through Feb intentions came in at 101.6. So despite a 3% cut in sows, we're talking about more sow fairings in that December through February period. That fell well outside the upper end of the pre-report estimates. The March through May fairing intentions came in at 99.2. That was near the top end of the pre-report estimate. So more sows farrowed out of what are fewer sows. Now, are we becoming more efficient in turning some sows here is the question out of that data, it seems to me. Pig crop, Sep through November pig crop coming in at 98.6, also fell outside the upper end of the range. So USDA telling us more pigs than we would have anticipated pre-report. And then inventory of hogs, especially lighter weight hogs, towards the upper end of the range. Those greater than 180 and 120 to 179 were at the more towards the midpoint of pre-report estimates, but pigs and hogs seems to be a little bit troubling. For me, the farrowing side is really the one that I'm trying to get my arms around to decide if is that as negative as it seems at first glance.
We hadn't seen major revisions in a hogs and pigs report in a couple of reports, and it looks like the USDA dug deep and made a significant amount of revisions to this quarterly hogs and pigs report.
Yes, and I sometimes say, boy, I'm glad I wasn't USDA having to estimate hogs and pigs, especially in the worst of COVID-19. But if you look at some of what they've done, all right, so total hogs kept for marketing, that June number, they revised down about 2.3 million head. However, by September, down only 665,000 head. So they pulled those inventory numbers down both March and June, yet kind of ended up with, by September, pulling that back more towards where that September number would have been originally. Maybe the most positive news is September 2020, greater than 180 pounds, they revised down 1.1 million head. Now they revised sows farrowed up 80,000 head, pig crop up nearly 1 million head, just a lot of moving pieces. I am not completely surprised to get some fairly substantial revisions just because what a tough time to estimate numbers for USDA through that whole COVID situation that was going on.
And it sure will give us something to keep our eyes out when that next report comes out in March.
Absolutely. I don't think we're done revising or seeing USDA revised numbers, especially the last couple quarters of 2020 as more information flows in.
Scott, that'll do it for us this week. Another shortened holiday week next week and a fairly quiet week, though, for us on the report side. What are we looking at next Friday or next Thursday?
Yeah, so we get a restaurant performance index out next Thursday, but otherwise it's going to be a pretty quiet week. Not going to be a lot of information out there for us on the livestock side next week.
Scott, have a happy holidays and very Merry Christmas to your family.
Likewise, Megan.
Thank you. We will see you all next weekend to have our weekly, or next week rather, to have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning. Visit our website, brownfieldagnews.com. Click subscribe. You can also submit questions and comments there as well. And while you're there, check out all of the really great Brownfield Ag News podcasts at brownfieldagnews.com/podcast. Have a happy holiday season. We'll talk to you next week. I'm Megan Grebner for Brownfield.